Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. I hope you guys are doing well as we go deeper and uncover the mysteries and where things really came from. And, we just keep getting bigger questions and curious what seems apparent as answers as we go deeper and deeper. So, what's really missing from Christianity is the Shekinah. And the Shekinah in Gnosticism is basically the feminine counterpart to the Christ. And so it's the feminine counterpart to the masculine. Here you see Shekinah glory is the Hebrew name given to the presence of God dwelling on the earth. The word Shekinah does not actually appear in the Bible, but in Hebrew it can mean he caused to dwell. And it was the term given to a divine visitation of the Hebrew God. Here they're using Yahweh. And so if you guys have studied this, there's times when Yahweh is used, there's times when El's used, sometimes Adonai, which just means Lord, Eheya, I am that I am. It's just interesting to really keep uncovering and going deeper and deeper and deeper. So in this article, they're saying a notable example of the Shekinah glory is the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that guided the Israelites through the desert. Recognize everybody has their own interpretations. The Shekinah glory is a visible manifestation of God in the natural world. At times, the Spirit of the Lord would visit people in human form. Genesis 18, 1-2. And at times, the Spirit of the Lord would rush upon a person and give him supernatural powers. Well, we know it happened when the tongues of flame came on the apostles. They all began to prophesy, right? And they all had paranormal abilities. Well, you find that in the Hindu tradition as well. And when somebody raises their kundalini, you get these gifts, and they are called siddhis. And these gifts are the same sort of paranormal abilities, but they're not really paranormal. They're things that we could all manifest if we but know how. So this is interesting because you could take these things a lot of ways. So, a physical manifestation of God on earth in Hinduism would be the concept of an avatar. And then, of course, we were talking about God's powers and how he's omniscient, omnipresent, right? Omnipotent. So when you really look at what that means, omnipresence means he's everywhere and everything. Well, you and I are part of everywhere and everything, right? So obviously God must dwell within us as well. Otherwise he could not be omnipresent, could not be omnipotent. And we see in Hinduism, you see some of the these are the avatars of Lord Vishnu. Vishnu is the preserver, Shiva is the destroyer, and Brahma is the creator God. They have their feminine counterparts. So you have Lakshmi, Parvati, and Sarasvati. So there's balance in the Hindu system, and there was balance in the Hebrew system, but it's been gone as we have seen a patriarchal society and aggressive society take over. Gnosticism had really as many followers, Gnostic Christianity, as any other form of Christianity in the beginning. But they were persecuted, and their books were burned until we found them at Nag Hammadi. And also with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found some that were Gnostic-oriented texts, which give us a really different look, because Gnosticism is about gnosis, which is direct experience. Nothing to do with, a power structure at church and, basically an elitist system. Here you see Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. And so they revered Sophia. Sophia is the central pivot of creation. It represents the feminine aspect in all things. She is wisdom incarnate, the goddess of all those who are wise. Sophia, also Chokmah in Hebrew, and it gets into some of the other ones as well. It all means wisdom from different traditions. The Judeo-Christian God's female soul. Source of his true power is Sophia. As goddess of wisdom and fate, her faces are many. And so it's fascinating to look at that for those of us that are very familiar with other systems. Now, She is usually associated with a wise King Solomon. Tells us that God gave wisdom to Solomon, and that he became wiser than all the kings in the East and all the wise people of Egypt. Wisdom 8:2, 16 and 18 tells us that Solomon was seen as married to Sophia. So are we talking an avatar, an incarnation there? So, or was it just simply that he had embraced the divine feminine aspect? So Wisdom 9:8-11 tells us that Sophia instructed Solomon in building the temple. All the Jews revered Sophia. King Solomon even put her right in the temple in the form of the goddess Asherah. So again, the divine feminine, divine masculine incarnate many times in many different ways. And in the Hindu concept, these are avatars. So after the reforms of King Josiah, there was a threat that the veneration of Sophia would come to a halt. There was even more of a threat when patriarchal Christianity took over the world. And so basically she's been purged from our whole belief set in modern Christianity. And again, we recognize it also as the Shekinah from the Hebrew tradition. And over here, this gets into talking about how the Shekinah is very much, we could relate it to Shakti in the Hindu system as well. And Shakti's counterpart is Shiva. And together they are the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And what's really interesting is that you see many depictions of Shiva and Shakti as one being, two halves, one whole. And this is a hint, a clue to balancing our energies and what we can achieve when the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is the Christian counterpart to Shekinah, to Shakti in many ways, and also to Sophia in some ways. When the Holy Spirit came upon the apostles, then they had the power to do miraculous things, including miraculous healings. When we balance our energy centers, as what is depicted here in the picture of Shiva and Shakti, we will raise our consciousness up. So Shiva and Shakti, the divine union of consciousness and energy. Now, Shiva means that which is not. So you could, in one sense, you could almost view Shiva as the void, that which comes before Shakti, which is the manifest creation. So that is another aspect of it. And so in that sense, if Shiva is the void, well, you can see how he's thought of as being the destroyer, and it really is the destroyer of the illusion. Because everything is an illusion that we perceive until we get to the core and are self-realized, when we realize who we really are, which only comes from that divine gnosis, which is a knowing that only comes from an experiential point of view. So it's pretty fascinating to see when we get past what they've done with the modern dogma. They are interrelated big time. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, there's something called sitting Shiva. Sitting Shiva is a term used to describe the action of Jewish mourners participating in the traditional rituals of observing a Shiva. And during the period of Shiva, mourners sometimes sit on low stools or boxes while they receive condolence calls. So it's the practice that symbolizes the mourner being brought low following the loss of a loved one. For 7 days, the family members of the deceased gather in one location, typically their own home or the home of the deceased, and mourn the loss in a variety of ways. Interesting, that they have that practice, which is the exact same wording as the god Shiva. So who was Abraham? As we were talking about before in the other video today, when we look at the Abrahamic tradition, it's a composite of many traditions that go before it. And we could see where a lot of this was taken from. Is it any coincidence that Abraham has Brahma in it and Sarah, or Sarai, Saraswati? Which came first? Well, as we had said, the Vedic tradition is very old, and the Abrahamic tradition, especially even when you're talking the Old Testament, the oldest writings we have are from anywhere from 200 AD to maybe as far back as 200 BC. So not as old. And especially when you look at first completed versions. You're talking even far later. So isn't it curious when we look at all these things? So in the history of the Jews, Jewish scholar and theologian Flavius Josephus wrote that the Greek philosopher Aristotle had said, "The Jews are derived from the Indian philosophers. They are named by the Indians Kalani." And Clercus of Soli wrote, "The Jews descend from the philosophers of India. Their philosophers are called in India Kalanians and in Syria Jews. The name of their capital is very difficult to pronounce. It's called Jerusalem." Megasthenes, who was sent to India by Seleucus Nicator about 300 years before Christ, and whose accounts from the New Inquiries are every day acquiring additional credit, says that the Jews were an Indian tribe, or a sect called Kalani. So now these writings are all coming from way before anything we really have biblically. So it's fascinating to see that, but it does make a lot of sense. And as we have seen, they have borrowed from many traditions. Many people wonder, where was Jesus in the lost days, the lost years? Well, there are traditions that he went east. The wise men came from the east, and they were revered in high regard because that's where all the philosophy and everything started. As we look into the civilization of the Harappan civilization, for instance, striking similarities between the Hindu god Brahma and his consort Sarasvati and the Jewish Abraham and Sarai. And they are more than mere coincidences. So, very interesting. Voltaire was of the opinion that Abraham descended from some of the numerous Brahmin priests who left India to spread their teachings throughout the world. And over time, we know how stories go. When you're telling stories, they kind of change a little, but you try to keep the core there. So, I mean, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's fascinating. How about the word Israel? Why? Why is it Israel? And does it really stand for Isis, Ra, and El? And Isis would be the Shekinah, Sophia, the divine feminine, the Shakti. Ra would be the divine masculine, the sun god, but also, you could relate that to the masculine divine principle of Shiva, or we could even say the Christ, because when we see the dying and resurrection gods, all relates to the sun, and it's transit every night, into darkness and then back out. So fascinating to see these things. Are they more than coincidence? I think so. Most definitely. And I think that what happens is that over time people change things to basically better fit, their purpose. And again, it really boils down, Shiva and Shakti boils down to consciousness and energy. Because what we're talking about, and here he's getting into talking about the chakras. Shiva symbolizes consciousness, the masculine principle. Shakti symbolizes the feminine principle, the activating power and energy. When a power becomes active and wherever energy exists, Shakti is working. Other terms for these primal principles are Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is consciousness, Prakriti is nature. Shiva is generally portrayed holding a trident, which represents the trinity of Ishwara, Purusha, and Prakriti. Think about how the powers that be have turned Shiva into a demon in many people's minds, and taken the trident, which symbolizes the trinity, and turned it into the devil's pitchfork. Of course, it's just part of the bigger plan of getting us farther and farther away from the truth. So when Shiva and Shakti are united, amazing things can happen. And as we look over here, it really is referencing the Ida and the Pingala, which are two nadis, two energy channels in the body. And again, when those two are in balance and harmony, energy flows up the Sushumna, which goes up through the central part of the spine, illuminating the third eye, activating Christ consciousness. That's what it's all about. And the elite want to keep people in fear, thinking it's all devils and demons, and keep us out of our power. So my friends, as always, thank you guys so much for your support over on Patreon and also on Ko-Fi. God bless and namaste.